Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Students, today we have started our new chapter, that is chapter number 16, Man and His Environment. Every organism has its specific surroundings of environment with which it continuously interacts and remains fully adapted. An organism's environment is the sum of physical, abiotic and biological biotic conditions which influence the organism. The study of the interrelationship between organisms and their environment is called ecology. And this system is ecosystem. A species is a group of organisms which can interbreed freely in nature to produce fertile offspring. What is a population? A population consists of all the members of a species that live in a particular area. Community. All the populations that live in a habitat and interact in various ways with one another are collectively called a community. Ecosystem. Living organisms cannot isolate it from the non-living part of the environment. The biotic and abiotic components of the environment interact with each other to form a system. The self-sufficient unit of an environment that is formed as a result of interactions between its biotic community and the abiotic components is known as an ecosystem. A pond, a lake, and a forest are examples of natural ecosystems. Ecosystems may also be artificial, for example, an aquarium. So here you are watching on your screen that biotic factors here are ducks, fish, plants and bacteria. Abiotic factors are sunlight, temperature, soil composition, water and pH. Next is biosphere. The biosphere is the global sum of all the ecosystems and it can also be termed the zone of life on Earth, a closed system apart from solar and cosmic radiation and heat from the interior of the Earth and largely self-regulating. Biosphere ranges from the floor of the oceans to the tops of the highest mountains. It is about 20 kilometers thick. The biosphere makes a thin layer surrounding the planet Earth. If you consider the Earth as of the size of an apple, then the biosphere will be as thick as the apple skin. The next is component of ecosystem. The ecosystem can be divided into two main components, biotic component and abiotic component. Biotic component includes the living parts of an ecosystem, while abiotic factors include the non-living parts of an ecosystem. Ecosystem can be further divided into biotic components and abiotic components. Biotic components include producers, consumers, and decomposers, while consumers are further divided into primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. And abiotic components include air, water, wind, soil, temperature, and rainfall. Producers. Producers are the organisms that are autotrophs in an ecosystem. They include plants, algae, and photosynthetic bacteria. These organisms are able to synthesize complex organic compounds from inorganic raw materials. Producers form the basis of any ecosystem. In terrestrial ecosystems, plants are the main producers. In aquatic ecosystems, the main producers are the floating photosynthetic organisms, mainly algae, called phytoplankton, and shallow water rooted plants. So here you are watching on your screen, producers are plants. Next is consumers. The consumers are the organisms that get their energy from eating other organisms. They are heterotrophs. They cannot synthesize their food and so depend upon producers for food. Consumers include all animals, fungi, protozoans, and many of the bacteria. The animals are the major consumers of ecosystem. They are further classified as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, scavengers. Herbivores only eat plants. Carnivores only eats animals. Omnivores eats both plants and animals. Scavengers eat bodies of dead organisms. Omnivores are the consumers that eat animal flesh as well as plant and plant products. Next is classification of consumers. First is primary consumer. Primary consumers are those which directly feed on plants or products of plants. Carnivores feed on other animals. Primary carnivores or secondary consumers feed on herbivores. Fox, frog and many fishes and snakes are the examples of secondary consumers. Secondary carnivores or tertiary consumers feed on the primary carnivores. Here you are watching that snail feeds on plants and owl feeds on snail and hawk feeds on owl. So snail would be the primary consumer, owl would be the secondary consumer and tertiary consumer would be hawk because it feeds on secondary consumer. Primary consumer is the first consumer. Primary consumers are heterotrophs that feed on producers. Since producers are typically plants, they are autotrophs. Primary consumers are herbivores. Secondary consumers feed on primary consumers. So here you are watching that on rabbit a fox feeds. So a fox would be secondary consumer and a secondary consumer is an animal that feeds on primary consumer. Tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumers feed on secondary consumers. Tertiary consumers are eaten by decomposers. Decomposers are reducers, break down the complex organic compounds of dead matter of plants and animals into simpler compounds. They secrete digestive enzymes into dead and decaying plant and animals remain to digest the organic material. After digestion, decomposers absorb the products for their own use. The remaining substances are added to the environment. Many types of bacteria and fungi are the principal decomposers of biosphere. So here you are watching that decomposers are mainly the fungi and organisms such as fungi that break down the remains of waste from other organisms are decomposers. So here is figure 16.1 from textbook page 115. Here are producers, consumers and decomposers. Next is energy flow in an ecosystem. In an ecosystem, energy as well as materials travel from one trophic level to the next. Trophic means food and trophic level is a food level at which an organism feeds in food chain. The first trophic level is made of producers, the second of primary consumers and so on. The flow of energy in different trophic levels of ecosystem is unidirectional. The following is the figure which is figure 16.2 from your textbook page 115. Here you are watching that sun is the primary source of energy for all ecosystems. Producers get solar energy and transform it into chemical energy by the process of photosynthesis. They store this energy in their tissues and also transform it into mechanical and heat energy during their metabolic activities. The energy in producers' tissues flow to herbivores when producers are eaten and herbivores transform it into mechanical and heat energy during their metabolic activities and store the rest in their tissues. Carnivores eat herbivores and get energy. They use it for their body activities and store the rest in their tissues. After the death of producers and consumers, the energy stored in their tissues is used by decomposers. The storage and expenditure of energy in an ecosystem is in accordance with the basic law of thermodynamics. That is, energy can neither be created nor destroyed but can be transformed from one form into another. In an ecosystem, there is constant flow or transfer of energy from the sun through producers constitute to consumers and decomposers. A significant decrease in useful energy during transfer of energy at each trophic level can be seen. Next is food chains. A food chain is a series of events in which one organism eats another and obtains energy. So here is a simple food chain where plant is a producer, insect is herbivore, and is first consumer and primary consumer. Mouse is omnivore and secondary consumer. Owl is tertiary consumer and is carnivore. So the materials flow from one trophic level to the next by the means of food chains and food webs. A food chain is a series of organisms with an ecosystem in which an organism feeds on the one before it and it is fed by one after it. For example, here is a food chain of owl. The base of food chain is always formed by a plant producer. It is eaten by a primary consumer which is preyed upon by a secondary consumer. The secondary consumer may be eaten by a tertiary consumer. A food chain can be therefore from the producer to the primary consumer, from the primary consumer to the secondary consumer, and it is converted into tertiary consumer. A food chain involves a nutritive interaction among the biotic components of an ecosystem. Usually there are 4 to 5 trophic levels. Shorter food chains provide greater available energy and vice versa. Next is food web. A food web shows the many different parts of plants and animals in which they are connected in a feeding relationship. A food web is a model that shows all the possible feeding relationships between organisms living in an ecosystem. If I am saying that a food web is the combination of various food chains, then it is right. So here you are watching figure 16.4. Here is a food web in grassland ecosystem. In nature, food chains are very complex as one organism may be the food source of many other organisms. Thus, instead of a simple linear food chain, there is a web-like structure formed by these interlinked food chains. Such interconnected food chains are collectively called as food web, and a food web can be defined as a network of food chains which are interconnected at various trophic levels, and trophic levels are basically the food levels. So that was all about food chains, food webs, and the components of ecosystem. I hope this lecture was a good source of information. Thank you and have a nice day.